there are some requests from the audience to ask a couple of questions to Amira that they were not able to do before the break, but I urge you to be quite brief, Amira, if it's possible. Yeah.
In your my name is Britta. In your description of the Israeli-Palestinian society, you have the feeling there's this wall between. And my mind says, like the Germans near the concentration camp after the war said, we didn't know what was happening there. So the future. We know every time we do something, we are being accused, as this lady said, of anti-Semitism. It doesn't seem to touch Israeli society in changing, in trying to understand. So what future are we going towards? We are activists. We have to, at the moment we are addressing the injustice, but I can't see what it is we are going towards. I think it's also important for us to understand where we're going.
Yeah, my name is Anselm. I have a short question. You described the Israeli apartheid system, and in South Africa, the slogan "One man, one vote." Today, we would say "One person, one vote." Was the very slogan that brought the apartheid system to a fall. Would that slogan could apply to Israel, to Palestine as well? You also quoted the necessity of a new strategy.
Third one.
Hi, my name is Bjørn Gunnar Saltnes. My background is two periods as an EAPPI accompanier and human rights observer on the West Bank, 2 periods during the last 3 years. 2 months ago, I asked a close friend of mine who is also very close to the Labour Party inner circles of foreign policy, and I asked him, can you explain to me why Norway is not willing to acknowledge a Palestinian state? And he said, to my knowledge, there are 2 answers to that. First of all, and maybe the most significant one, is that Norway does not want to jeopardize its position as head of the donor countries. Because if you make yourself visible, acknowledging Palestine as a state, you will get a lot of hassle from the international community. And the other point he said was that Israel seems to pinpoint Norway, especially when there is critique coming, and saying that Norway is the worst country expressing anti-Semitism in Europe. And Norway seems to get a lot more accusations about anti-Semitism than other countries. And they don't want to, and they can't handle all that shit coming from Israel, so they keep a low profile. I don't know whether the politician, the courageous politician in the panel can comment on that. The other thing is that last week your colleague Amir Haas, Gideon Levi, said that we, Israel, Palestinians, are facing a major disaster in March with Netanyahu being re-elected, but there is even a more grave disaster coming if the Labour Party gets a majority and Herzog is in power, because he will say, oh, we will engage in negotiations with the Palestinians again, and the entire international community will calm down, and the pressure and the current position will subside. And I thought I would never say this.
Excuse me, could you please be brief?
I'm looking for Netanyahu to be re-elected.
Then we take one more questions and then Amira can answer, or it's at the end. Nej, han helt nederst. Palestina. Ja. It's record. It's for the recording, so if you can use the microphone.
I would like to ask if it's possible to strengthen the international society, which has been weak since the creation of his state of Israel. It's not just the arrogance of the Israel state, but also the weakness of the international society. To add a short sentence to the resolution, United Nations resolution, 29th of November 1947, the partition resolution, where there were mentioned the right to return for the Palestinian people. If it's possible to make it as such, the right and duty to return back to homeland, where also the Israelis or the Jewish who came from Russia have the duty to return back to Russia, who are not born in Palestine/Israel. So we can work all together to strengthen the Israeli society, the international society, not just leave Israel make what they want. This is the question, and I have a comment to what happened, said by this gentleman who talk about
Okay. Then we draw the line there for the question from the audience. And Amira, would you comment on some of the questions?
I don't know how helpful it is to say, like the Germans, that that Israelis don't see what is happening to the Palestinians just like the Germans. You can bring many other examples. You have rich cities in the Americas, both north and south, where they don't see what happens 5 meters away to the poor suburbs. So we don't have to go that far as to the German experience. It has its hyperbolic effect, but I'm not sure it's very productive when you make these comparisons. And also, there are many. The thing is that you can know about what is happening. You can know a lot about the occupation. There are quite a few Israeli groups that are engaged in it. The thing is that it's true that the majority of Israelis do not want to know. Sometimes they are forced to know. But also Israelis are not put under danger when they are exposing what is happening to the Palestinians. As people in apartheid, I don't want to compare to Germany, but as people in South Africa, I, for example, like all the other Israeli journalists, we can write about the occupation, and Haaretz publishes and is well known, and nothing happens, and we don't risk our life. So I say it's a very, very, I think, feeble comparison. Yeah, there have been suggestions now concerning the one person, one vote. The one person, one vote is of course potentially very strong, but it needs, the Palestinians have to decide that they don't want a national state of their own. Right now, the still great part of the Palestinian national movement does think of a state which is Palestinian, where they can exercise sovereignty. One state, some of them, as I said, some think of course of one state in the whole country which will be Palestinian, but this is much more difficult. And besides, we see as what is happening today in South Africa, that economical apartheid is not over. Still, I believe that right now, even among the Palestinian, those groups that do want a Palestinian state and understand the importance of perfect or improving and changing the tactics, they don't really envision themselves living with Jews in the same state. And I'm talking about not about those who think of not that the Jews should leave the country. That's why I think that still the two-state solution has a resonance with the more Palestinians than it is being the impression is. People want to live in a sovereign state, not to be run by Jews, not to be bullied and to be bossed around by Jews, but to experience this, that it technically looks not possible right now technically. I'll tell you why. It is a problem when we say that this is impossible to have two states because they are all the settlers. Okay, they are all the settlers. Why can't we remove 600,000 Jews 20 kilometers away? Why do we have to say that the settlements have made the two-state solution impossible? Because they are Jews and you cannot remove them? They're not going to change the language of their schools. They're not going to change the health system. They're not going to change their work. They're just going to move to stop being violators of international law, for example. So if this is presented in a different way, it is possible. I think that the use of technical reasons why the two-state solution is impossible is politically wrong. And it's not that I said that the two-state solution is the end of the road. No. But if the two-state solution were, as some say, were so good for the Israeli establishment, why did Israel do everything possible to foil it? Because this is what Israel did in the past 20 years. Everything possible in order to foil the two-state solution. Because it has a potential of enormous change in the reality and reducing or disarming Israeli Jews from their privileges in the long run, but in a peaceful way. Israel of today and the realities that brought into the being of Israel 70 years ago, the conditions and the circumstances have changed, and we have to make use of the changes of these circumstances, of course. So whatever we add, duty or the return, we have to make use of the changes of these circumstances, and which goes both ways. It goes. I think that 70 years ago there was very little attention paid, if at all, to the Palestinian plight in '48, and for several reasons. Because in comparison, it looked because they were not white, they are not considered white, because there was a tradition of European colonialism. Of course, they didn't see those, because it was before the wars of liberation of colonized countries and colonized peoples, because it was 3 years after the Second World War that ended with so many, not only people who were murdered and killed, but also around 12 million refugees. So at that time, in '49, the 700,000 Palestinian refugees were part of a major huge wave of refugees, European refugees, from all over. This is one of the successes of Palestinian popular politics, is that their case, that they have not been swollen and drowned in oblivion and forgetfulness, but on the contrary, that they are very visible now in the political awareness, international awareness. Whether to add the word or not to add the word, it depends on the political strength of the Palestinian movement, and as I said, this it must go through enormous changes.
Thank you very much, Amira. I'm sure we could have continued for a long time on this very complex and important and interesting question. But we have agenda here, And as Christine said, this is not an ordinary conference. This is a conference where we want to talk about action, what to do. And we will now turn to the subject of the panel discussion. How can Norway contribute to making sure that Palestinian children are treated according to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child? And the campaign has already put forward some demands, which I now will refer to. And I would like the panel here to contribute and comment on these demands with their experience, professional experience. And we also have a new member of the panel here, the one and only politician. This Svein Roald Hansen from the Labour Party. He's also a member of the Finance and Foreign Committee of the Parliament in Norway, so he is a very powerful man. I will now refer to the 4 demands that the campaign has put forward.
Where are they?
It's on the leaflets here. Is it in English too? The demand of the campaign is the following. No child should be held imprisoned. That's a statement, actually. If children are arrested and imprisoned, there are the demands. No use of torture and violence. Palestinian and Israeli children should be treated equal. The Norwegian foreign minister should put pressure on the Israeli authorities to end the use of administrative detention of Palestinian children. That are the demands put forward by this platform of the conference, which a lot of different organizations are standing behind. I'm referring to this here, and this is also the demands in the campaign that you can sign underskriftskampanje outside here. So I think we should give the word to the politician first, since he has not had the word yet. So please, Svein Roald Hansen.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. This praxis with detenting children and youth has been taken up with the Israeli authorities from our Minister of Foreign Affairs, the former one, and also Børge Brende has done that with his partner in Israel. But obviously that's not efficient enough, of course. It isn't. But that's the diplomatic way to do it. But maybe the most important thing to get an end to this is, of course, to solve the bigger problem, to get rid of the occupation. And that's a even bigger question. But maybe I could comment of a couple of things that have been raised in the questions. That one of them is why don't we criticize Israel more than we do? Well, I think that's part of the guilt from the Second World War. It's all through Europe. But a couple of years ago, I was in a meeting with members from the European Parliament and from the Member States Parliament in Ireland. We had a working session on the situation in Middle East, Palestine, Israel. And listened to my colleagues from a lot of countries. You could feel that vad heter det? Tålmodighet.
Patience.
The patience, thank you. with Israel was very, very thin. So I think that is wearing out. But we do criticize Israel. If you remember some years back when they held back the money, tax money to Palestine, to PA, then our Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre said that Israel is waterboarding the economy of the PA. That was pretty strong word used, and it didn't fall very good by the Israel embassy, I can tell you. But it's right. Also, as Sissel Wold explained, when she made reports from the war at Gaza, she was highly criticized because they felt that it was the reality was a kind of critics from Israel. You cannot report so-called neutral when the one side throws some rockets hitting one house and the other side is bombing half the country flat. That's very difficult. 2 words about recognizing Palestine. It's 2 things to say. One thing is that the policy of Norway is to recognize a reality and not a vision. That has been the policy of Norway for many years back. But the other thing is, of course, that we headed the donor group. That is two-sided because that gives us a possibility to influence of the process, what's happening. On the other side is does that we have to be cautious. We have to not slap one side in the face or give them a feeling that we do that. So that's a part of it. But now, after the, we can say that the hope of a solution, a negotiated solution, is at the dead end. Then we have to have a new debate. And this question will be debated in the Labour parties at the convention in April. I don't know the outcome, but I'm sure that the government we now have will not recognize Palestine, whatever Labour Party asks them to do. That for sure. But the other thing is also, will it make a difference? It's 141 countries recognize Palestine. It hasn't made a difference. So, well, I tell you in the middle of April if the Labour Party will advise the government to recognize Palestine. But what to do with those the questions raised? I will listen to every good advice and also take with me the impressions from this conference. Thank you.
Okay. I think we will continue with the panelists, and then we come back to the discussion between the panelists and the audience. Thank you. Yeah, please.
Second. First of all, I want to thank you for coming today. Instead of enjoying lovely weather, I'm told this is a lovely weather in in Oslo. For me, as a Palestinian, it'll be a nightmare weather, ice and cold. But if you think it's beautiful, thank you for coming here to listen to us rather than go skiing. Second of all, after listening to lots of people here, panelists and people in the audience, I would like to make an admission. I would like to let you know that I am so happy I am not an international lawyer. And I'm very happy I'm not a politician, excuse me. And I'm very happy I'm not a journalist, because all these people know how to talk about the big picture and how to analyze and how to blame and how to quote and how to throw in, more ingredients that will make the situation even more and more complex and difficult to untangle. I'm simply a knitter. I knit, besides working with the women's organization. And very often when I knit, my yarn gets entangled. And I blame it on the manufacturer, and I sometimes blame it on my husband for moving my knitting to another place without telling me. I blame it on the cat. But in the end, I'm stuck with this yarn and I have to knit. And the only way I can do it and go on with my objective is to find the end of the thread and then follow it. Why I'm saying all this? It's because when we focus on the big issues, we will all be lost. We will go nowhere. We have to find the tip end of something that is so apparently complex and difficult and start to pull it. In my opinion, unless we focus and find one issue which will have an impact and an effect on the bigger issue, our day-to-day will have been wasted. I strongly believe that the issue of child detention is at the heart of what occupation is all about. It hits at the heart of the settlement project that is the most evil, excuse my word, of every other aspect of the occupation. That is why, thank you. That is why I think we have to pick simple requests. I will not tell you what maybe I will actually. I think, as I changed my mind. In my work, when I go around the West Bank and I speak to women mostly, and they tell me about all sorts of things, the one thing that distresses them most is the issue of child detention and the manner in which it is done. That is why I think I would like to recommend that you all find a way to push the demand, which is already made by so many people, by UNICEF, by the UK Parliament, by lots of other people, which is basically to put an end to night raids. It will already make a huge difference on the ground, and it will basically untangle the grip that the occupation has on the Palestinian society. Without night raids, the military will not be able to continue doing what they do, from the simple little things of arresting children, although it may not be simple, to the big policy which all Israeli governments on all political spectrums has pushed, which is basically to continue to build settlements. I will let Gerard talk about 6 very basic recommendations which we strongly believe, if implemented, will make a huge difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Salva. Then we move to Gerard. I'll jump you since you need to rest a little.
Okay, I'll pick up from where Salwa left off with the 6 recommendations. I think when you're making recommendations, you have to be quite careful, because what you don't want to do is just make it a best practices occupation. You need to actually challenge the system at its very heart. Otherwise, you can be 100% successful and nothing much will change. And so we've given a lot of thought to the 6 recommendations. We've been essentially working on them for 8 years. And they've been taken up by, as Salwa mentioned, the UK government, UNICEF, the Dutch government, sections of the EU. And so in a sense, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. A lot of work has already been done on selecting the recommendations. And they've already been taken up by a lot of other institutions. And so I would suggest that these are quite good ones to work on, rather than making what can be quite a simple argument more complicated than it needs to be. The 6 recommendations have really focused on, they've taken that description that I gave earlier and tried to work out what is the heart of this system, and essentially asking the question, how does this system achieve a conviction rate of 99.74%, and somehow challenging that conviction rate? Because if these recommendations are implemented, I can assure you, effectively implemented, all 6 of them, there is no way on earth that this system can maintain a conviction rate of 99.74%, which is so important to maintaining control in the West Bank, military control. So the 6 recommendations are, the first one is what Salwa mentioned. And just before I add, when you're selecting recommendations too, they have to be specific, very specific. They have to be actionable. 2, they have to be reasonable. So for example, saying that no child should be imprisoned sounds like a nice idea, but it's completely unactionable and unreasonable. In Britain, for example, the minimum age of criminal responsibility in Britain is 10. You're not going to get the British government saying you can't lock up children. The British government loves locking up children. So that's simply not a reasonable and actionable recommendation. So it's important that they're reasonable, actionable, and achievable. So the first one is no night raids except in exceptional circumstances. This is a conflict situation. There may be situations where for military purposes, they have to go into a village at night. But it's so rare in the case of children. But you need that point included to, I think, in a sense, to appeal to a more mainstream audience too, which is an essential part of this work. If we don't mainstream this issue, change will not occur. So the first one is no night raids except in exceptional circumstances for the reasons we made. And there are plenty of other ways of achieving that result. Of if you need to detain someone, you don't need to go into a village at night. The second one is under military law, these children have various rights. They're not as many rights as you have under a civilian system, but you still have rights. For example, the right to silence and the right to consult with a lawyer. These children, in most cases, are not being informed of those rights. They must be informed of those rights in Arabic at the time of arrest. Again, that's achievable and it's reasonable. And it's the law. It's even enshrined in the military law. The third one is every child must consult with a lawyer prior to interrogation. That's essential. Some lawyers that we work with, they received some funding a few years back to hire a lawyer with a motorbike who would be on call 24 hours a day in the West Bank. And what would happen is when someone was arrested, they would call this lawyer and he would get to the interrogation center on his motorbike before the child was interrogated. They had a 100% success rate because the children did not talk. They did not give confessions because they knew what their rights were. That's essential. The third one is that every child should be accompanied by a parent during the interrogation process. That is something that is enshrined in many jurisdictions around the world. In the UK, I don't know what the situation is in Norway, but in the UK, a child is entitled to have a responsible adult with them in the interrogation room. The thinking behind that is fairly obvious, and that it's unlikely that an interrogator or a policeman is going to threaten or slap a child if a parent is there. And presumably, these interrogators will dispute a lot of what we've said today. Fair enough. If they're not doing what we say they're doing, they will have no problem whatsoever in having that independent oversight in the interrogation room. What are we up to? 5. The fifth recommendation is every interrogation must be audio-visually recorded. Again, that not only provides protection to the child during the interrogation, it also provides protection to the interrogator against false allegations of wrongdoing. If this were to be a legitimate system, there would be no complaint about having independent oversight in the interrogation room. It's something that's been brought in to effect in many jurisdictions. In the UK, they brought it in after it was discovered that our IRA suspects had spent 15 to 20 years in prison because policemen had beaten them up and they hadn't done the crime. After those miscarriages of justice, they brought in audio-visual recording of interrogations. What's interesting with that one is because of outside pressure, particularly from the UK government and UNICEF, the military authorities have made moves to look like they're implementing that, basically to appease foreign opinion. And so in September of last year, the military commander in the West Bank issued Military Order 1745. So that means there's been 1,745 military orders in the West Bank since 1967, in which he said every interrogation of minors in the West Bank must be audio-visually recorded, which sounds great. But then when you translate the Hebrew, you see at the end it says, this does not apply in security-related offenses. And all of these offenses essentially are security-related offenses. But what that does show you, which I think is interesting, is that this was a response to outside pressure. So it is the case that the authorities now are acutely aware that this has become a public relations disaster for them. And the way change often occurs, and this is what we're noticing in the West Bank, is you go from total denial that there's a problem to, okay, people are watching us now, so we better look better. You have a public relations exercise, and that's where we're at now. But that's the way change often occurs. You go from denial, public relations exercise, and then it's for us to see if we can take it to something actually substantive. And the final recommendation, which is crucial, is that if any of those previous 5 have not been complied with, the prosecution must be discontinued and the child released. And that's to provide an incentive to make sure that these are implemented. Because what we're seeing again in the West Bank, in the military courts, as a result of outside pressure, is that, for example, informing children that they have a right to consult with a lawyer. More interrogators now, in the last year, are informing children that they have the right to consult with a lawyer. But in the next sentence, they start interrogating the child. So the child doesn't actually get the opportunity to consult with the lawyer. But they do that so they can tick a box and they can go back to the British government when they get hassled by the British government and say, look, we've got the statistics, this is what we're doing. And that's a large part of our work, is to monitor very precisely exactly what's going on. So that, because what we're seeing, as I mentioned, is that lots of changes are occurring now due to outside pressure, but they're form over substance. And so our job is to monitor very carefully in order to feed back to people in the British government and other governments around Europe, so they have the information that they can respond to the Israeli authorities when the Israeli authorities say, we've fixed this problem. They can then say, well, no, you're only introducing audio-visual recording in non-security related offences. So that's a very important monitoring part of what we do. But those 6 recommendations, I can assure you, if they were effectively, all 6, effectively implemented, there is no way this system could survive in its current format. I'll just say read you one other thing, which I think is hugely significant and should, I think, give us all cause for some small optimism. And that is, last year, some Israeli lawyers brought a freedom of information application against the Israeli military in the West Bank. And they asked for the Israeli military to produce the regulations for arresting children in the West Bank. And after months and months of delay, they did. And there's nothing particularly exciting about those regulations. But what caught my attention was they also produced a document, and I don't know why they produced this document, but the document they produced was under the heading Debriefing Paper for Commanders and Soldiers. And I'll read from it. And it basically says, the arresting of children in the West Bank has now become particularly sensitive. And it says, international bodies and various human rights groups have criticized sharply, time and again, the way in which minors are treated in the Judea and Samaria area, West Bank, from the stage of arrest through the interrogation and up to the trial. And this criticism has increased significantly in the past year, being expressed by a sequence of reports, publications, and articles in key international and Israeli media outlets. The cumulative weight of such reports and publications may inflict real harm on the legitimacy of Israel and the actions in the area in the West Bank. Now, I think that's massively significant, that this issue is the issue that is causing key concern. What is perhaps a little bit disappointing is the person who wrote this is more concerned about how they're looking rather than that there's a problem in the West Bank regarding this issue. But it's a start. So rather than reinvent the wheel, push at something where a lot of work has already been done, which is clearly hitting the right target, and which, with those 6 recommendations, no reasonable person, no matter what your politics are, can resist those. No one can argue that a child should not be informed what their legal rights are at the right time. It's simply, you cannot argue with any credibility against those recommendations. And so I would urge people to seriously consider taking up those recommendations.
I just have one question to you myself. Having demands within the military rule, so to speak, within the concept of military rule, aren't you in danger of actually saying that we accept that there is military rule in the West Bank and that children should be tried in a military court?
I mean, that's like I said at the start. That's always the danger that you have to balance. Now, we all know that the essence of all of this is long-term military occupation, de facto annexation, however you want to categorize it, and the settlements. We all know that that's the heart of all of these problems. You can go into a meeting with a politician if you like and say, please, can you end the occupation? Good luck to you. On the other hand, you can go into a meeting and say, I want a video camera in the interrogation room. As I said before, I'm convinced, having looked at this system for 8 years, that if those 6 recommendations were introduced, this system cannot survive. So you're asking for something reasonable, but the system cannot survive if they were effectively implemented. So essentially what's going to happen is what we've seen, and that is changes are being made to try and fool people that these recommendations are being implemented when they're not. And that's when very close monitoring is essential to identify that this is not substantive change, but form over substance. And that's something, and it's going to be a game that's going to be played out. It's going to be, the authorities are going to say, we've complied with those recommendations, and those monitoring the system it'll be their job to show, no, you have not. And that's going to be the tussle.
Okay, thank you. Then it's Amira. Can I maybe ask you if you agree to what's been said by the 2 last speakers, that child detention is at the heart of the occupation?
I think there are other hearts. It's not the only heart. But of course, I mean, I totally sympathize with this tactics of taking one issue for you as activists, and for others, take this one issue, as you said so nicely, the thread of the edge of a yarn, and pull it. I would say to add another crack in the Israeli wall of righteousness, self-righteousness. This is important, but because I'm a journalist, I'm sorry, Salwa, and because also I have a traditional role of maybe spoiling the party, I have to add some remarks. But first, I would like to say about, and this is an anecdote of a friend of mine, Hassan from Nablus. He called me one day. It was during the war of 2012. He said me, listen, my son was arrested. His son was 16 years old, and he threw stones. Okay, he said, I could not stop him. I did the same thing when I was his age, and I could not stop him. He's worried. But he said, you know what happened? They called me from the detention center, and they told me to come and to be present in his interrogation. He said, it never happened in our times, that our parents would be called. So I was thinking about you among others. So it's like, I said, you see, there is a progress even in the occupation. So of course, the occupation knows how to change some things in order to appear legal. But this is not enough for me. I think it's important for a campaign, but I think you do have to bear in mind some other things. Also, the Palestinians are a factor. They are not a passive recipient. And I come back to what I said at the beginning. This is a class issue. We are talking about kids who come from poorer parts of the Palestinian society, and they are stones. They come from refugees and from refugee camps, and they come from villages and poorer parts of the cities. For example, in my neighborhood, it's not a fancy neighborhood in El Bire, but sometimes when the army jeeps come in the night, we know later on that those who came to throw stones at them are from the refugee camp of Kalandia. They're not from our neighborhood. And again, I don't live in one of the fancy neighborhoods, very bourgeois neighborhood. But those who came to throw stones came from the refugee camp of Kalandia, which is quite far, a few kilometers. But they knew that the army is coming in. So there is the stones that are being thrown at are also an internal issue within the Palestinian society. I say it for you as awareness because you are an activist group. It is a message also. It is they are throwing stones as showing sentiment of anger with the PA, not only with the Israelis. It is showing anger about the class stratification in the society. What they feel is a neglect of the poorer areas of Palestinian society. Their parents can less restrain them at home because they have less means, but I have friends from more middle-class areas, and they say, no, we are doing everything possible to prevent them from going to throw stones. Maybe they send them to courses, to some afternoon courses, I don't know. But they'll do everything possible to. Now, it should be also a Palestinian debate. Do we want these 1,000 children or 500 children or whatever carry the yoke of a struggle when there is no strategy of struggle right now, of popular struggle? What do we do with these children? I mean, what do we do in order, I mean, is this a price that is that should be paid? And on the account of these children who are the least cared for in the society? Very often when I talk, I say that is the anger with the PA or with these differences in the society. It is something that you should be aware of. Well, I don't say it does not contradict the suggestion brought up here, and I have some others. It does not contradict at all. But it is also a Palestinian debate. Is it fair to send those children to be the pioneers of something which does not exist right now? It is not like the first Intifada when thousands of people were engaged in throwing stones. It became some sort, sometimes it is also a little competition between children and children who do not feel accepted at school. Sometimes the children who might have some problems at home. There are many other differences, there are many other reasons added to the occupation that make it happen and should be addressed by the Palestinian society.
Amira.
So, yeah, two more things, sorry. Now, and if it is not, and if it is taken already as something which is a normal part of life, then okay, those children should be be given instructions how to face the soldiers, what to do. Of course, I know the whole situation is very frightening when it happens, but the PA should be involved in it. Okay, give the kids classes. What your rights are, how to behave to families in all those threatened villages where they are the doomed to be raided by Israelis because they are close to settlements, etc. There should be some preparation and helping the children and the families. Like you see in Nabi Saleh, which is one of the villages that is most raided because it is engaged in so many in the demonstrations against the nearby settlement, etc. So people are, for example, given cameras, and they take footage of the soldiers coming in. So there are ways for the Palestinian society to strengthen those families. It shouldn't be only coming from outside. And another thing is the issue of lawyers. The level and the commitment of lawyers varies very much, from group to group, from person to person. Now, perhaps this should be a request from Palestinians, at least when it comes to children, bring the best lawyers. It shouldn't be that there are cases where it is very clear that it's very easy to release, I wouldn't say very easy, I'm not a lawyer, but it is possible to release a child before the court ended on all kinds of legal reasonings. And it is not being done because of a neglect of a lawyer, the neglect of a lawyer. So this is a demand also should be addressed to within the Palestinian society. If you are already allowing the children to go and to represent a non-existent resistance right now. Now, since I say it's several hearts, I know. I have, and it looks maybe one of your, an example to something which cannot happen, but I have usually a suggestion when I talk to diplomats, and they look at me and they laugh at me, I know, but still I say it. Because there are so many hearts and it is impossible to engage in everything in such a thorough way, I mean, I would say Area C, I would say the Bedouins, the plans to expel the Bedouins from their places. East Jerusalem, the issue of water. I mean, you have many hearts in this damned occupation. But as a kind of a land or road sign that I suggest, I think one of the demands should be of Europe to reinstate the visas that Israelis have to, that the Israelis who enter Europe should have a visa, like others. And say, because you do not, I mean, we are not going to bomb you as we bombed Belgrade when it violated international decisions, I mean, UN decisions. We are not going to bomb you like we bombed Iraq. I mean, we do not see Germans and Italian jets bombing Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, and I'm not calling for this. But Israel is violating a series of international resolutions. Israel is violating the basic human rights that we are committed to as Europe. And for example, the settlements. We are helpless now, so we do the list. You have to, we have to bring back the visa. So right now, every Israeli can go any moment. I can decide today that I fly tomorrow to Europe, and no problem. So no, we have to bring back the visa so that you go to the consuls, different consulates, and you ask for a visa like Palestinians have to do, Palestinians in the occupied territory, and then you wait. You wait 1 week, you wait 2 months, you wait 3 months. I ask you to start campaigning for this. And you can say, okay, because we cannot distinguish between settlers and the others, so all the Israelis have to have a visa. True, there are some Israelis with European passports, but in general, I mean, this is something that it can be a message to the Israeli society, because at the end you have to address the Israeli society and to shake this fake normalcy and to put as many cracks as possible. And this can be only when they feel that occupation doesn't pay. Right now, occupation pays very well. And they have to feel that this occupation has a cost, that this comfort in the occupation has a cost. And
Thank you.
Maybe it looks far away, but that's my 5 pence.
I personally would like to listen to you for hours, but we have to let the audience pose a question. So, Svendruel, you are on my list, but now I have to let the people talk. It's Ahmed first.
Thank you very much, everybody. I've been hearing with a lot of patience here, actually, this evening. And I was born in a refugee camp in Gaza. And since I was born, actually, my mother was telling me, I hope one day when you become a 16 or 17 years old, you will have the experience of ending the occupation. And I think my hair became gray, and I'm soon dying, and this occupation is never over. I was listening with a lot of patience to the different comments here, and I become really angry. First of all, to our politician here. I mean, you said that that recognizing Palestine will not add to the conflict or resolving the conflict, because in Norway traditionally has been like a very neutral country. I mean, have you really considered about withdrawing or recognition of Israel so that you have the both parties in a way kind of, I mean, equal in this regard? And my second frustration point here is related to what you said, Amira has. I mean, you said during the day today that you have experienced that patients from Palestine and Israel sitting beside each other in the beds, and doctors, Palestinians and Israeli doctors are working together. I mean, I think this is a bit misleading, because what I experienced from my heart and from my life, that 472 children were killed or murdered in areas, checkpoints were waiting to enter for the Israeli hospital or being transferred into the West Bank and through there to Jordan to get a medical treatment after 7 years of blockade of Gaza. I mean, this is the reality. I mean, I don't understand that there is Palestinian patients are really in the Israeli prison, and the only doctor, Palestinian doctors who was working in the Israeli hospitals, while he was working and serving Israeli people, the Israeli airplanes bombed his house and killed 3 children, and now he ended up in Canada. I mean, this is the grim reality. I mean, I really felt a bit frustrated about that. This is one thing. The second thing, I mean, I really agree with, last one thing.
There should be questions, very
I mean,
brief
one
questions.
thing, and this is my really question. I mean, thank you, Gerard and Salwa, for the 6 recommendations. They are very important, but don't you think this makes like increasing the quality of occupation, in a way?
No.
I mean, that's always the point. That's the point we were making, that when you make recommendations, you have to be very careful about weighing up whether you're making it a best practices occupation, or whether what you recommend would actually dismantle it. And I think my experience looking at this, working on this for 8 years, is that these 6 recommendations, this system cannot operate with those 6 recommendations. It cannot maintain a conviction rate of 99.74%. The reason it can't is because at the heart of it is to drag children out of bed in the middle of the night, tie them up, sleep deprive them, threaten them, scare them, interrogate them, and get them to sign a confession. That's how it works. That's how you get a conviction rate of 99.74%. And so you have to look at ways of dismantling and disrupting that process.
Okay, thank you. Then it's the panelist Svein Roald who want to elaborate on what Norway can do, I hope.
No, well, the time is running out. But
30 seconds.
Always the case for politicians.
Two points. I visited Palestine and Israel together with the committee in 2011. Met with Habas. He told us about the agreement who nearly was to finalized with Olmert, and we listened to him, and what he said was confirmed in an article by Livni 2 days after in Jerusalem Post, I think it was. So the solution for a peace settlement is there. The political will is not. And now I think nobody believed that Netanyahu ever had really wanted a negotiation. But I think the most serious thing I heard here today is what Amira told us about what's happening to the mentality to the people in Israel and on the West Bank in Palestine. They don't longer see each other. They don't longer mingle with each other, and they lose belief in that peace is possible. So one thing is that the settlements make it very difficult to get a Palestinian state. But if the mentality leaves that possibility, that's, I think, even more serious, because then the hope for it also might disappear.
Sandra, could you please relate to the topic of this panel and tell us a little bit more what you think could be done from the side of Norway? You told us that the foreign minister has taken up the issue of children in prison. But is that enough? Couldn't your committee, like adopting these demands and also the 6 demands from the Palestinian lawyers and push it forward?
Well, I think that's the 6 demands from in the UNICEF document is a very wise way to go further. I will take this with me back to the Parliament, and also when we will have a debate now about foreign policy, the minister will give his overview, and that will be an opportunity for me to raise this question, and that I will do. Thank you.
That's very good. That we have on record now. So yeah, we have like 3 more from the audience, and then we have to set a line because it's already 4 o'clock. And I see Amira. He would like to have a final statement afterwards. But could we let the audience speak? Like I give you 30 seconds each. Sorry, but it's 4 o'clock, and people want to go skiing or something. We had a long day. Then it's you, yeah. No, you after. Yeah, that I. Don't remember names.
Altså, jeg heter Sonja Krohn og er billedkunstner, men excuse me. My name is Sonja Krohn. I have been working with the Palestine Committee and with Akulbi. That is an organization that, very small one, but hopefully growing, that is working with academic and cultural boycott of the state of Israel. And if we are talking about what to be done concrete in Norway, because we are now in Norway, and why not concentrate a little about that, like our politician here said, it would be a very good idea that more people are joining. I have a feeling that very many here are into culture or academia in some way, in some niveau, and that there is really needed a more pressure from that part of society. And as you, Amira, said, it is also a very, very important part of a political fight to use the culture and academia. So we really need that. So to be very short, I will just say that.
Thank you, Sonja. And now it's... everybody in this room are already boycotting whatever they can.
Yeah, and we just say one thing more, and that is, of course, just a part of the BDS movement.
Yes, thank you.
This is only the small part.
No, it's han bak deg. Han bak deg. Mustafa.
Hi. My name is Mustafa. You talked about there is one heart for the occupation and several hearts. I think there is no heart for the occupation. This is the first comment that I want to talk about. I have a question or 2 questions for Amira. Do we have to blame the kids that they are throwing stones, or do we have to blame the occupation, or to blame the soldiers that they are entering the villages without any reason, without any excuse? And if you have another suggestion than throwing stones for these kids that they might lost their father's dead or in the prison, or they can't take control of them. The second question is, you talked about an individual case in Nablus that called you and told you about his son, that they called him to have a lawyer or something. Do you think it's a general thing or just individual case? Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Then we have one last, and that's the lady there. Yeah. Nei, jeg trodde det var... Ja, okay. Nei, jeg trodde du ville si noe. Hallo? Nei, okay. You don't want to say anything? Or yeah? I gave the word to you.
3 questions.
One question, very
30
short.
Questions.
10 seconds.
Exactly how much can the military court watch monitor? And what is the economical interest of the EU in trading with Israel regarding in relation to this visa?
Okay, thank you. That was short. Now I give the word to Amira. And if you want to answer the other one very briefly, and then we have to...
First with the easy part. The father was called in order to not for a lawyer to be present, but for him to be present in the in questioning of his son. And then the son was released. I gave it as an anecdote to relate to what Gerard was talking about. So this is a change which is, of course, I mean, in comparison to all the other things, it is a small change, and it doesn't occur, it is not that widespread. But I give it as it's not something that I was looking for it, but it happened. Sometimes parents cannot come, and sometimes parents themselves feel intimidated. And sometimes they don't see the point because the whole process is not just. So these are also. But it gives an example to how the system is trying to accommodate itself because of the pressure. This was the reason why I gave it. I didn't give it, I am an Israeli, yes, but I didn't give it as a way to show that how great are the Israelis. I mean, if this is your interpretation, then maybe I should repeat all what I said for 2 hours. And the same thing about blaming the kids. Of course I don't blame the kids, and I think that I opened my talk with quoting my father, what he said about the right to throw stones, and I also wrote an article in that vein. At the same time, it is also a social matter, Palestinian social matter, and I think it is not wrong to see an issue in all the aspects. And this is exactly one of the things, one of the problems is that children from marginalized parts of Palestinian society want to gain some capital in a society which is very class stratified, and this is for them a way. But if this is a way for them, then they should be, then this should be something taken into awareness and be discussed. And maybe it is a message to the society that there should be more resources given to those kids in other things. If anyway we know, okay, they can express their opposition to the occupation, but if it doesn't lead anywhere right now, maybe it's better for the PA to allocate its budget in a different way, and for society to demand it. This should be discussed. I live in the society, I know it is not. Yeah, no, one of the things, once I wrote, so this should be a demand. Where are you, all the Palestinian policemen? So why don't you, for example, why aren't you spread, even without arms, but be present in villages in Area B, for example. You don't have to dismantle the PA, but you can be present in all those villages and tell the Israelis, we do not allow you to. I mean, this is part of a strategy of changing strategy. That's why I said that the ICC alone is not enough. So you have to see a whole concept. But to use the children, this is not, of course I don't blame the children. But they should, we should not also easily participate in making them heroes against their own good. If they think that being portrayed as heroes is the only way for them to get something from a society, then and then be traumatized, as was described for so long, then doesn't mean that we should encourage them for this. So I just wanted, I think it is my role, not because I'm an Israeli, but because I live in the society and I care for the society. There is another comment that I don't know if Ahmed has left already or is here. Okay. The same thing. I didn't bring the example of the hospitals in order to praise Israel. I gave it as an example to show why it doesn't have the components of the racist components that South Africa had. Because very often when we want to say that this is apartheid, people bring about such examples. Oh, but you don't have separate universities and hospitals, and this is true. So there is this element of apartheid which does not exist. But I'll be the last person to ignore and to understate the gravity of Israeli attacks on children in Gaza and elsewhere. But it's things have to be taken in the complex, not in the whole complex, not as separate, and then jump into it as if this is the proof that one neglects the gravity of Israeli policies.
Okay, thank you very much, Amira. Then the last word goes to Gerard for the question he got, and then we have to
just
finish.
the monitoring we do. So we collect a minimum of 100 sworn testimonies from children every year. We also monitor any changes to the military law or practice and procedure in the military courts. And then every 6 months we produce an electronic report, which you can find on our website, where we look at exactly what's gone on in the previous 6 months, both from a legal perspective, but also from an evidentiary perspective, because frequently what we're seeing is plenty of changes to the law, but absolutely no change whatsoever to the treatment on the ground. And so that's how we monitor the situation. And then we send this to the media, to a lot of diplomats get it, a lot of members of parliament around Europe get it, and it's the basis for questions then in parliament, informed questions. And that's a big part of what we do to ensure that when a European politician takes this up with an Israeli counterpart and they get a response, often that's when the debate ends because the politician or the diplomat doesn't have enough information. What we try to do is arm that politician with more information so they can ask another question and another question and another question.
Okay, thank you very much, all of you. I was supposed to sum up the whole conference, but since we are 10 past, I cannot do that. I would just, on behalf of the organizers, thank you all very much, all those who came and sat inside in this beautiful day, and not least our speakers coming all the way from Palestine. I would say that I learned a lot from today. This was not a conference with a big declaration, but a lot of facts, a lot of information, and not least the perspective, the different perspective that we can take with us, and also to be able to see it from the Israeli side was very important for me, at least. In order to understand the enemy, in order to fight the enemy, you have to understand him. So, and I'm also very happy that this issue of the children in prison will be taken up in our big thing, the parliament, very soon. Thank you. Thank
you. Don't go, please. Wait a minute, because I would also like to just thank you, but especially to thank our audience, you people. But I also want to say that if you want this discussion to go on, you can come to the Quaker Society tomorrow night at 6 o'clock, Grönland 12, where we'll show another film called When the Boys Return, and we will have plenty of time. I will not throw you out, I promise, after 8. So at 6 o'clock tomorrow, we can watch a film, and at least Gerard and Salwa will be there, I hope. Although Amira is going home to Palestine today. And I would like very much to thank you for coming and to give you some little things to take back.